So hello everybody and welcome to the Emerging Payments Association's Asia's first webinar and hot topic briefing on 2020. And it's a pleasure to see that so many people are joining us tonight or afternoon. And also it's good to see that we have representatives from different parts of the value chain of the payments industry. I'm Camilla Bullock and I'm the Director General for Community Events. And I'm the one that's having the pleasure to plan all our events actually, but specifically those webinars and hot topic briefings, which we're running on a bi-monthly basis. And today we're going to look at the outlook for the payments industry in Asia. And just quickly, for those of you who are new to the Emerging Payments Association, we're excited that you found us and that you're on the call tonight. And we are the prominent Asia Payments Association, so PEN Asia. And our mission is to be the most influential trade body in the emerging payments. And our agenda is to lead policy and advocacy to improve the payments industry and to improve lives everywhere. The EPA was founded in UK in 2004, and we're more than 150 members globally, and we've been active in Asia since late 2018. But I'm not going to talk too much about EPA because tonight I'm joined by our advisory board, and they are the ones that's setting our policy priorities and steering the agenda and our activities. So thank you very much for joining us. I will introduce you in a second. And doing so, I will also ask for you to say a few words about why you have chosen to be on the EPA advisory board and why your organizations are active within the Emerging Payments Association. So with further ado, our first person is our Deputy Chairperson, Andy White. He is also the CEO for AusPayNet in Australia. And AusPayNet is the domestic trade organization for payments. And Andy, do I have you with me?
You sure do, Camilla.
Excellent. So can you in just a few words say why you are on the EPA advisory board?
Absolutely. So Australian Payments Network, as you've just described, we're very focused obviously on Australia, and collaboration in payments is really the heart of what we do. Being familiar with that, and also the work that EPA does in the UK, having met with Tony Craddock there, really passionate about EPA Asia. I think there's a fantastic opportunity for us to take those ideas of collaboration on payments in a domestic setting and really supercharge them across the region. And as hopefully we'll explore on this call, I think that's really exciting when you think of the differences, but also the similarities across Asia. So I think that's the great opportunity that EPA Asia has in that cross-border context in the region.
Excellent, thank you. And Malcolm Wright, he is the Chief Compliance Officer at Diginex in Hong Kong. Malcolm, hello.
Hi there, thanks Camilla. Hi everybody. So I'm Chief Compliance Officer at Diginex. We are a blockchain financial services firm and building out a new range of financial services using blockchain and those types of technologies. I was previously in London, so I previously worked at Revolut and before that at Thomson Reuters, and I've been involved in the EPA in London for probably the best part of 3 or 4 years. So when the opportunity came to say, well, you know, when I moved to Asia, the opportunity came to say, well, actually we're starting to look at a cross-border group, as Andy called out there, that could really focus on how payments are emerging in this region. I said, well, this is something that I'd like to lend my experience to and to be able to support. I think that now is absolutely the right time for this type of association to exist, because it's going to need this regional collaboration in order to drive the next generation of how the future will actually look in terms of payments and that entire ecosystem.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much for that. And Anke Seller from Wirecard, she's head of strategy, and Anke was one of our founding members. So please, Anke, can you tell us a bit why you are part of the Emerging Payments Association?
Yes, hi, thank you, Camilla. This is Anke Zeller. Thank you for the introduction. I am in Wirecard heading the group strategy for Asia. And I had the pleasure to already be introduced to EPA in Europe several years ago before I moved to Asia in 2018. And in discussion with Tony Craddock, we took up the idea to see how we can actually make this organization also relevant here for Asia. And as Camilla said, I was really glad to be one of the founding members, founding mothers, not fathers. But we have worked for the last 2 years to establish this new organization, come up with a nice content and also interesting members who are driving the topics that we look into here in the region forward. And I think it's a really exciting times here, like my predecessors have already pointed out. We are engaging in driving and supporting financial services payments in a collaborative way forward for the next generation. And APAC obviously is one of the most important regions in that respect here, as we all are aware, and I'm very happy to be part of that. So thank you, Camilla.
Excellent, thank you very much. And also a founding member is PayPal, and we have on the call Stephen Shen, who is head of policy and also an active advisory board member and member in EPA. So Steve.
Hello, greetings from the hot and humid Singapore. Greetings to my fellow board members and to those on the line. And thank you, Camilla, for organizing this fantastic webinar to kick off the year. I head PayPal's regional government relations that look after public policy and regulatory matters for the company. We're in 15 jurisdictions in APAC, very active here. And some of our key strategic markets are also in APAC. For PayPal, I echo many of the sentiments that were expressed earlier. I do think that not only is this the right time for the industry is maturing in the region, and as part of that maturity, there are an array of issues, challenges, and opportunities. And in many cases, in other trade associations, many of these issues are secondary, whether it's in general business, finance, or tech associations. Payments has always been a secondary issue that they looked after. And I think this is the time now for the industry to have a collective voice. And it's in this very dynamic region where where the growth area are tremendous, especially in e-commerce, cross-border trade. And I am very happy that we have an organization like EPA to focus our issue and be the leading voice and thought leader for the industry in the region.
Excellent, thank you very much for that. It makes me happy that you are as excited as us for the future and what we can do together. We should also have had Mary McHale, who is head of business development for Asia for Equinix on the call, but unfortunately she can't join us today. But we're very happy to have Equinix on board of the Emerging Payment Association as the leading data center that's connected businesses globally. So we are very thankful that we have the advisory board or parts of the advisory boards on the call and the support you've been giving us in the first founding year of the association. In 2019, we hosted more than 30 events and we had more than 1,000 payments professionals and leaders attending our event. The events were roundtables, panels, webinars, networking sessions, and we touched on a breadth of different topics. So we discussed digital banking and the regulatory hurdles to get the license, but also strategic questions like we had a roundtable in Hong Kong and we talked about how can virtual banking in the Hong Kong's Greater Bay Area prepare for global outward expansion. It was a very, very popular roundtable and with great outcomes. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about digital banking in 2020 with several licenses being issued across the region. And in July, we talked and discussed on a hot topic briefing, and we actually had Malcolm as a guest on that one, talking about Facebook's announcement around Libra. And I think also that announcement might have been a moonshot then, but it was a wake-up call for the central banks to explore more around the digital currency. And I think Malcolm probably will touch on the announcement from yesterday that several central banks are pooling their research and experience of a potential central bank digital currency. We talked lots about digital payments, real-time payments, and we also hosted a study tour to Sweden, the Cashless Society, to learn how they have come to be looking to be the first country to go cashless in 2022. And of course, we also talked to all the regulators in the region, or not all of them, of course not, but we spoke mainly to Australia, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And that dialogue we're going to expand into different countries going forward. But the conversations was lots around Open Banking Asia, and we've been working on a project, Open Banking Asia, that is going to be delivered in a couple of weeks to the APFF, which is the Asia Pacific Financial Forum. And the recommendations are going to be put forward to the APAC finance minister. So it's great to see how the associations already is getting airtime with decision makers. But enough about what I remember from 2019. Let's go over to the panelists to hear. So if I start with you, Malcolm, what issues and trends within payments in Asia will you remember from 2019?
I think I'm going to talk more generally a little bit because I think some of the global issues actually have a very regional focus as well. So for me, I think the first one is actually the emergence of the central bank digital currencies, that whole conversation, or CBDCs, as you're going to get used to that acronym because I think we're going to hear a lot of that in the sort of coming years. So the CBDCs, there's really a number of reasons why this is now being considered by central banks. And, you know, if we consider that halfway through the year, China announced, it was in the middle of 2019 really, that it was ready to implement a CBDC. And that was quite significant because it put it above everybody else who was sort of thinking about these things and saying, yeah, well, we're kind of ready to move on this. There's some benefits that come with them. So, you know, there's a wider range of options for monetary policy. You could, in theory, you know, distribute wealth back to individuals who are holding digital currency that's issued by the central bank. That's one example of how you can affect monetary policy. It creates a safer financial system. So instead of settlement going through bank accounts, it could go directly through central bank money. It reduces potentially credit and liquidity risk. With that, it can reduce systemic importance of large banks in particular countries, and it also reduces the need for government guarantees on deposits in quite the same way that exists in the system today. It could also encourage competition and innovation in payment systems. So it would allow for new direct payment providers to really be working directly with a CBDC. That could create more competition. It means that small banks would no longer need to rely on big banks to process payments. And then if I put my anti-money laundering hat on, then it could also, with the decline in the actual physical cash, that would then make money laundering much harder. Because although a lot of it still happens in the cash world today, moving it into a digital currency would create a lot more transparency and visibility and not necessarily traceability, but the ability to control much better. And then it could also have benefits around alternative finance and financial inclusion. So you could give people digital cash accounts in quite a safe way. And lastly, it also introduces sort of currency control. So we had China, middle of the year. Singapore, they started piloting actually before 2019 with Project Ubin in 2018. Hong Kong, last November, the HKMA revealed it's conducting research into a CBDC. And Australia, actually just on the cusp of the year now, the Reserve Bank revealed it's also investigating a CBDC over the Ethereum network. So I think this was a really big pivotal year where this started to come to the fore. Within that, we have things such as Libra and the concept of a stablecoin discussion, which is a digital representation of money or a token, not issued by a central bank, but issued by a private organization or a trust. So there are a few out there, such as USDC or USDT, but also the project around Libra that really made people, as Camilla said, it really made people sort of sit up and go, oh, we have to start, thinking about the possibility that there's a possibility for global transfer of funds from one party to another, almost in real time, in something that's not our national currency. Now, because Libra ran into trouble fairly early on in terms of regulatory backlashes, like because it caught regulators unaware, then we sort of started to see firms drop away. And the latest one actually was yesterday, was Vodafone, who came out of the project. So now we've had Vodafone, MasterCard, Visa, actually PayPal, they sort of pulled back from it. So stablecoins can introduce a very, very good mechanism for instant transfer of value. You transfer your national currency into a stablecoin and can then use that for spend. So they do add value to an economy, but they need to be done in a safe and regulated way. But I think 2019 was really the year about the emergence of stablecoins and the potential that they could have to impact not only national monetary policy, but also the way in which people start to interact with the financial system and be able to pay for things. And then lastly, it was headline news for most of last year, at least for myself, because I work in the virtual assets, digital asset crypto industry, was around the anti-money laundering regulations from the Financial Action Task Force, rather the recommendations that started to be passed down into law on a country-by-country basis that will see virtual asset service providers, so firms providing exchange or transfer of virtual assets, becoming regulated for anti-money laundering, which really sees the beginning of a maturity of an industry that, again, is very, very new, but needed to have some new levels of control applied. So I think those are probably the three things that came to the forefront for me over the last year.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. It's definitely an exciting space that I think we'll see more of. Stephen, what is your memories, I was going to say? What do you think about 2019? So
maybe I'll talk at a very high level. The three themes that I can think of from 2019, and then what that means for the payment regulatory landscape. In terms of 2019, I think there was a full steam into digital transformation in the region, whether it's in the form of cashless society, smart nation, or industry 4.0. I think across the board, all countries are looking at how to embark on that transformation, and we've seen that in ASEAN, looking at various payments network. We have seen it in Japan, launching their cashless society, getting ready for Tokyo 2020. We have seen Industry 4.0 as a springboard to look at changes in other digitalization of other industry as well. The second area is around disruption. I think we have now matured away from disruption into integration and scaling. And what I mean by that is as we look at emerging new technologies, it's not about how they're disrupting the industry anymore. It's about how can we integrate and scale these emerging technologies, whether it's in the form of AI, automation, big data, into the existing business models, and how then we can utilize them for compliance, for customer protection, for a variety of reasons. And the third is around data. I think last year is really a year of focus on data, and that really came out of the 2018 GDPR implementation in the region. It's about how do they implement some of the extraterritorial implication of that law. And a lot of the jurisdictions came up with various data protection in the form of privacy, cybersecurity, and other types of protection measures around data. And what that means is that it has driven complex regulatory changes in the region around the area of compliance and oversight for regulators and also for a lot of the market players. And it also has increased government investment in infrastructure as well. I think two areas, in addition to I don't want to repeat the digital currency topic, but in addition to that, there are two other areas. I think one is that we have seen massive changes around the payments frameworks and regulations in the region. Singapore, for 2-3 years now, have been undergoing its changes into updating its Payment Services Act, and that will provide a new framework for regulation of payment systems and payment service providers this year as it come into implementation. And it has now incorporated new regulations for new forms of payment, such as digital tokens and cryptocurrency. So that is really very forward-looking. We have seen Japan now also thinking about amending its Services Payments Act to really look at how to update some of its opaque regulations around that area. We also have seen Australia reviewing potential changes to its existing stored value facilities to include crypto, whether it's Opera looking at the wallets or from ASIC looking at the e-payments code. So we'll see some of those themes overflow into this year as well. And of course, in India, also looking at amending and changing some of its payment regulations, especially around payment gateways and payment aggregators. Some of that will flow into this year, whether it's in form of implementation or further discussions around the area. Data, I think we've seen a number of jurisdictions are proposing changes to existing and creating new data protection and cybersecurity regulations after the implementation of GDPR. Hong Kong has proposed changes to its data protection law, and India as well. Now there's a draft Personal Data Protection Act currently in Parliament for discussion. Australia as well have proposed changes to its Privacy Act. I think all of that, it's around how do they strengthen some of the controls, some of the notification, and also increase sanctions, fines, and strengthen some of the government authorities for able to access information, and also incorporating new technologies, new players into the law. Things like how do they safeguard social media and online platforms, data around that. So we will see data, that theme will continue to be an important area as well for this year.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. It's interesting it's like the local topics and then the regional topics are blending together. So let's hear, Andy, what is your perspective on what happened 2019?
Yeah, so I might do a couple of things. One is, I think, focus on the end user of payments, and the second one is sort of take a slightly longer term view. And the lens I'm going to use there is really use of mobile, what we jokingly call the game of phones, as consumers and other users increasingly use their phones to make payments and do other things that are related to payments. And of course, that's a trend that we've seen for many years now. But I think 2019 was interesting because you started to see, and again, different implementations around the regions. But 2019 in Australia was the first real year that our new payments platform with real-time payments was live and fully active, and you saw a significant volume go through that. And the way that was done was integration of that into banking apps. So something that consumers are naturally familiar with on their phone, but then a direct interface into real-time payments. In other jurisdictions in the region, obviously you've got quite different implementations, and you've got some that would naturally use QR codes a lot more than we would see here in Australia. You've got some that would use digital wallets. You've got some that would use digital wallets and and QR codes. And I think that's fascinating to think about the differences across the region there. Also in 2019, you started to see the fledgling changes to how that might work in the future. So with the introduction of ultra-wideband technology, you'd expect the way people use their mobiles to change quite markedly in terms of not necessarily having to take them out of their pockets. You've also seen in China the first step beyond the phone, so payment by facial recognition rather than using the phone itself. And then I think beyond payments from a consumer perspective, that starts to get quite interesting as well, because some of the things that Stephen and Malcolm have talked to, for your digital banking, obviously, but also for your open banking or open data more generally, then the phone becomes the way that you would do those kind of transactions as well. And then I think linked to that, the use of phone to authenticate the individual, and the way that can start solving for issues that you see in financial crime, such as card not present fraud, as well as its use as an authentication mechanism for a face-to-face payment. And then broadening that out, that starts to create the opportunity for digital identity solutions and digital identity service providers to leverage that authentication for other things, including open banking, but all where the consumer is in control of their own experience. And then when I think about other users of payments, again, what is interesting there is the use of mobile to significantly reduce the costs for a merchant in taking payments, whether those payments are card payments or they're through a real-time payment rail, or they're sort of a neutral solution through a QR code. So again, the use of a mobile phone for a merchant, and again, you've seen significant growth in that segment through different implementations across the region in 2019. So I think all of that shows a really interesting trend, both longer term, as I say, it's not a new thing in terms of people using their mobile phones to make payments, but the way that might change heading into 2020, I think, becomes really quite interesting.
Yeah, thank you for that. We think alike on that one. I'm hoping that we're going to see some of the network providers and more around them being members and joining the discussion in 2020. Anke, please, could we hear from you?
Yes, of course. So I think my three colleagues here have already outlined some of the major trends, and I think probably to add here is that obviously 2019 and 2020 are not like separate years, but there's a flow, there's a merging of these different kind of aspects, technologies moving on forward. So from our perspective, from the Wirecard perspective, being active in the entire region here in Asia, we of course see some, let's say, similarities in certain countries, and also some in others, such as the ones that are, let's say, more developed, have a higher penetration for mobile phone services and so on and so forth. And accordingly, of course, let's say the developments are different. So being here in Singapore with our hub, we of course see also a lot of new wallet solutions, super apps coming up. Obviously the Chinese, the WeChat, Alipay, but also new ones are coming up more and more so. And there's also a high development in cashless that we see, and not only here in Singapore, which wants to become a smart city, cashless city soon, but also in other countries around the Asian region. So I would say payments innovations in Southeast Asia in 2019 have really developed further, and there are new, let's say, collaborations happening. There's a lot of things happening based on open comm platforms, interoperable standards. which are kind of like the basis for a future payment system, also making real-time cross-border payments more and more the experience more and more possible and more important, of course, for everybody who's like traveling the region, not only for business purpose, but also for leisure purposes. One other area I would also like to point out is obviously an area which is very closely linked to the development, which is the data, the big data, the analysis of the new data that's happening. So, and also everything related to AI. We've seen a lot of new devices, new developments, new innovations already happening in the years before, also in 2019, with new ways of ordering, shopping, voice commerce coming up more and more. So now also here in this region, we have obviously financial service organizations that are also reaping the benefits from AI, such as customer engagement, higher competitiveness, accelerated innovation, higher margins, or also improved business intelligence. And obviously, the consumer is also looking more and more into embracing these new areas, but also looking into seeing that the security and then the quality obviously is also taken care of. So that, of course, is something that we should also not underestimate when we talk about all of these different topics. So I would say this are two of the, let's say, main areas that we saw last year. Maybe one I would also like to point out, which already again goes into, of course, the future, 2020 and beyond, is what we see is coming more and more also with our European eye, let's say, because we're headquartered in Germany. Is something that what we call mobility as a service. So basically everything which is related to commerce on the move, data-driven value-added services, which we really see as one of the mega trends, not only in the European, but also here in the Asian market. So mobility is really like key, the future of mobility being key. And it's also opening doors to new passenger transports with electric, driverless, cashless kind of features, which will become more and more important, and which, of course, will also have an impact on the way people interact, but also consume and pay then in the long run. And all the concepts that are coming around this mobility as a service. So in our view, one of the keys there is like a digital platform that really ensures this kind of connectivity, and that will ultimately also integrate all of the financial services.
Good, thank you. I think we can all agree that we covered a lot of ground in 2019, and it was a lot of topics that were discussed. But if we start to try to narrow in when we're looking at 2020, a lot of the things we talked about will, of course, continue. Some might not. But if I start with you, Stephen, again, like one topic that you think will dominate the conversation and your conversations.
Yeah, I think you know, the area some of my colleagues mentioned earlier around AML and KYC will be increasingly an important area given the volume of digital transactions, whether it's mobile payment or internet payment, and I think regulators and government officials, there'll be more pressure to have a better oversight of these transactions and better prudential oversight of the organizations that process these transactions. I think this is a massive challenge for the industry because there are international standards and there are as well as local standards. And as a global company like PayPal that operates in a number of markets around the world, we rely on a global approach. And as we then go into the various markets, especially in Asia where it's so fragmented and also different maturity, of the financial service system and what comes with that when you water it down to AML and KYC. And by no means I'm an expert. I'm not a compliance or risk trained professional, but I do know from interactions with policymakers, government officials, regulators, and business colleagues, the availability of information, access, resources is very different across the jurisdiction. Infrastructure is very different. Processes are very different. Then how do you overlay global best practices that are mandated by global regulators, and how then do you also meet the local regulators' requirements with specific local requirements? How do you provide at the same time meet compliance and meet the law? I think that is a challenge for many financial institutions, and this is also a very costly area. There are a number of statistics that are reported out there that KYC AML costs major financial institutions at the low end $500 million a year to several $1 billion a year just to process this. And this is an important area for our industry, an important area as we move more and more into the digital transformation, with e-commerce and cross-border trade. I do think that going into 2020, this will be increasingly focused, and the regulators, more and more will tighten requirements, more and more will mandate more reportings and more oversight. Now that said, I do think that there are opportunities for new entrants, fintech startups, new technologies to really help to enhance capability and compliance in this area. The use of AI, biometrics, machine learning, data analytics, and the like. Things like, how can we use some of these technologies to better risk score transactions, monitoring, and name screening alerts, for example? How do we use data analytics to better detect and link patterns, or use real-time data gathering to enhance assessment of money laundering and the likes? And so I do think there are opportunities, but I think this is one area that will continue to remain a massive challenge for the industry, with more and more regulatory requirements and oversight.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe we hear from Andy here, because he's coming across a lot of organizations coming to Australia and meeting the new regulations that sometimes and often differs from the rest of Asia. So Andy, do you have any comments around this?
Yeah, I do. I'm going to contravene what you asked, Camilla, and not go with one theme for the year, because I think there's a lot to be thought about. It's going to be a busy year ahead. I think I'd agree wholeheartedly with Anka that there'll be as always a focus on innovation in payments. As I've already mentioned, I think there'll be a focus on digital identity and a real opportunity for digital identity service providers to kickstart that. I think from a regulatory perspective, there'll be a lot of focus on resilience, and I think that's true in Australia. I think it's true across the region. There've been some very high-profile payment outages, and I think regulators worldwide, you're seeing this in Europe as well, are really focused on how you make sure that payment systems, as they become increasingly digital, that they're also resilient. And that's difficult, because it's not just about the payment system itself, it's about their telecommunications networks, their energy source, etc. But definitely a focus for regulators. I think there will be, in part because of that increased digital nature, a real focus on financial inclusion and accessibility to make sure that digital payments are convenient for all consumers and work for all consumers. We'll continue to be focused quite rightly on financial crime. Payments need to continue to be secure, and we need to make sure that we fight fraud as that fraud changes in its pattern as well. And I think, interestingly, one of the things that certainly we're focused in on here, and I think this is true not just in Asia but across the world, I think generally countries are quite good at and are becoming increasingly good at supporting innovation and supporting new payment types. What they're less good at is thinking about what that means for legacy payment systems, and how do you make sure that you provide consumer choice, but also that you close down payment systems that are redundant and you focus in on efficiency. And so I think that's certainly something that we're currently consulting the industry on in Australia. I think that will be a real theme for 2020. How do you make sure that payment systems remain efficient and therefore you close down old payment systems and legacy architecture while supporting new innovation.
Good, great, thank you. And before we go on, I just wanted to say to all the audience that you can send in questions through the discussion, and then we will ask them towards the end of the call. So thank you very much for that, Andy. Maybe jump to order a bit of it. Anke, do you want to say what do you think 2020 will have in store for us?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, as previously said, I think it's kind of like 19 is merging into 20. So there's like a continuous kind of development happening, and coming back to not only what my colleague said in terms of all the new regulatory demands and requests, which obviously are also happening. New laws are going to be in place in order to regulate the environmental market more so, which obviously we all embrace, and also to see that all the necessary processes and everything are in place to work towards those goals. I think continuing with one of the topics that I brought up before, which was the new mobility, that also merges quite nicely into the topic of what we call platform economy. And that's for sure something that we feel is kind of like the basis for the ongoing and the future development of all financial services. And what I mean by that, just to give you some major example, as we are all aware of, is Alibaba and the platform that was developed there, and the kind of tremendous success these guys have had here in the region, and we see so many more examples coming up already, and that's also what we expect more so in different industry areas, such as the travel industry, where more and more examples, platform examples, are being set up in order to steer up payments and, well, let's say shopping experiences and payments even more so. So we did a short analysis, and we see the value of the platform and the scaling effects there actually to be more than 9 billion euros in the socio-economic value in the B2B platforms between 2016 and 2025. And maybe adding to that, obviously that has to go along, and that's also one of the other topics which I would like to point out with frictionless commerce. So in other words, a shopper, and we look at this already, quite from the, let's say, shopping experience from the end consumer. A shopper always wants like a frictionless kind of a shopping experience, regardless of the interface that he has, or regardless of, we were talking about smartphones before. Obviously, in some countries, we use a lot of the different kind of devices, be it like a notebook, a PC, your smartphone, your mobile phone, or other kind of devices. And you always want to have like the same kind of experience when you do your shopping, and that's really what we also see as key and dominating, that all of these, let's say, different devices and interfaces will kind of like merge into this one user experience, and regardless of where the shopping will be triggered from, the customer will, or the consumer will expect the same kind of experience. And that will be really interesting to watch as well, because some of the countries here in the Asia region, when we look at countries such as Indonesia, Philippines, pretty interesting to see And the expectation is that they will leapfrog actually certain kind of technology developments. So really go not from the classical kind of development notebook to the next form, but really like leapfrog the development and go immediately into shopping via the mobile phone and the apps and the what have you, what we were pointing out before. So I think these are areas that will for sure dominate also here in 2020, and here in Asia, I'm sure there will be really new, interesting, exciting examples to come up in the new year to come.
Yeah, I often think we might not know what's going to dominate, but we'll see. Malcolm, what do you think is on the roadmap?
I was actually just thinking that it'd be great to replay this on the 31st of December as well to see how far we come through the year. I also want to pinch. Yeah, I also want to pinch Andy's game of phones, because I really like that. So I may reuse that, Andy. I was thinking actually about, in terms of regulation, if I go back to sort of 2007, 2008, there used to be about 20, 28 regulatory alerts globally on a daily basis. 10 years later, that number has gone up to about 280. I think that's gone higher, a lot higher still. And I say this because if I see what's coming through in this emerging space, whether it's e-money, whether it's payment providers, whether it's crypto, there is a lot of activity from regulators, not only regionally, but on a global basis. And I think that this is something that's going to really accelerate through this year. So if I take the digital asset space, or virtual asset space as it's sometimes called, I think this is the year of maturity. So we will start to really see stable coins. What are they going to be treated as? So MAS in Singapore produced a consultation just before Christmas, which is looking at, what's the regulatory treatment of stablecoins? Under what conditions might they be considered as e-money? And this question is starting to come up because a stablecoin could act as an alternative to money. It could act as an alternative to a CBDC. So how should it be treated from a regulatory perspective, and how should payment providers in turn then actually work with it? Libra, I think that discussion continues. It really wraps into that stablecoins discussion. The Financial Action Task Force, that's going to be big this year. So that whole AML piece around countries introducing legislation for AML. So we've had, Singapore, we've had to a degree Hong Kong, we've had Japan has been there for some time, and Australia as well for some time. But I think that we'll see that emerging through other countries as well. That is going to have an effect on that ecosystem, the crypto ecosystem. It could restrict some innovation. It could push innovation in new compliant ways, and I think that's the direction it will head. We may see some firms stop trading, as has happened in Europe. We may see mergers and acquisitions. The one thing that I think may also happen is, at least for virtual asset firms, is that banking will become easier, because if they are regulated by a credible regulator, then, or licensed or authorized or overseen by a regulator, that may then make it easier for them to get bank accounts. And indeed, in November, HKMA, I think it's November or December, HKMA issued a circular here in Hong Kong about how banks should consider firms that work with virtual assets, rather than it being a blanket no. It should be done on an individual risk-based approach. Back to CBDCs, so our central bank digital currencies. So just yesterday, the Bank of England made an announcement that a number of central banks are coming together to really start to investigate the use cases for CBDCs. So you had the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada, European Central Bank, the Swedish Bank, Swiss Bank, and it's all overseen by the Bank of International Settlements. Now, the interesting one that joined there, that was new to the group, was the Bank of Japan. So we are starting to see some regional play there. In fact, there's actually 18 banks globally that are developing their CBDCs. And China also announced, again, just a few days ago, that they are ready to start trials just over the border here from Hong Kong in Shenzhen. So there is a lot of activity, and I think we will start to see that move, and that's going to shape how the payment industry looks. And then lastly, cybersecurity and data privacy. I think Stephen mentioned it earlier where he called out about changes to data privacy laws. In Hong Kong, the discussion is to give the Data Privacy Commissioner much more authority and talk almost of a European GDPR style data privacy law. That may progress further. We'll certainly see more sort of cybersecurity incidents, and I think that has implications across any industry, but particularly where it's involving payments and that side of the world.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, it's an exciting space to be in, and we are in an exciting region. Change is going quicker here than anywhere else, and we're growing faster. I did have some more questions, but I think that we're going to open the line because I have a few questions from the participants, and I would love them to get to ask them, or I'm actually going to read them out. So here's a question that in 2019, we saw some mega payment corporate deals. Already in 2020, we have seen some other further mega deals in the first few weeks. So what is the outlook and what are the trend here? I'm not sure who has any reflections on the news that we already have seen in 2020.
Maybe I can shed some insight. I think what that means is that you see the lines are starting to blur. And what I mean by that is that you see that new entrants are going into other industries. We have seen in the virtual banking, as you mentioned earlier, you're seeing payments company, even telecom companies now are applying for virtual banking licenses. You're seeing new tech companies getting into a payment space. Amazon made a big investment in India and big announcement in the payments area. Facebook launched the Facebook Pay in the US. I think some of the mega deals, probably the person alluded to last year, some of it came from PayPal. We announced the purchase of Honey. We bought iZetto early this year. We doubled down with our partnership with Mercado Libre in Latin America. And I think from kind of a PayPal perspective, we no longer want to be where you think of us at the checkout in the e-commerce ecosystem. We want to be a part of the ecosystem, and what that means is that we want consumers to think of us as they start their journey in looking at products and services all the way to the end of their cycle of payments, and then to come back and think about us again. And so from a payment company, we want to be really integrated and in the center of the ecosystem of the e-commerce platform. And so I think what that means, and you see Visa with this recent purchase in that company, and you see that the lines are starting to blur, and this will present a massive challenge for regulators, because these companies have very different sets of consumers, different sets of risk matrix. And how do you regulate them when consumers, their expectations and their profile are very different from that of traditional banks? And so I think some of these areas will present opportunities and challenges.
Thank you, Stephen. It's definitely be interesting to see who partners up with whom and what services we can expect to come out of that. Anybody else that have any reflections on that question? Okay, then I'm going to take one more here. Virtual banks seem to be growing slow. When will the virtual banks see accelerated growth so that they can scale? Don't know if this question comes natural to anybody to jump in on. I think
there's two parts to that one. The first part is the regulatory part. So the work necessary to actually get a license in the first place. And I think if we look at the way the UK had set up the challenge bank or the e-payments ecosystem, it was slightly different from how it's been adopted in Asia. And as a result, so a lot of firms come into the space quite quickly and set up shop and then accelerate their growth through very strong customer acquisition. But And they also had the Europe on the doorstep, which if you had the e-money license, you could then passport throughout Europe, giving you sort of 500 million people to get in one go. I think there's some challenges in Asia in different ways. So there's other alternative payment means already to a certain degree. The licensing regimes have been more carefully overseen in a sense by the regulators before issuing the licenses, setting up the supervisory, ensuring that there's the right level of experience amongst the team that's both building and going to be providing the operational oversight. I think all of those things sort of play into ensuring that the firms are secure and robust before they start business. But this is going to be the year when they really start to trade. So I think this is where we'll start to see it, particularly in sort of Hong Kong and Singapore. And we'll make an assessment as the year goes on.
Thank you very much. And yeah, my personal is also will change a lot. We will see very different players in a couple of years. I have one more question here, and that is, loyalty cards and gift cards are growing in use and as store of value. How likely will we see convergence to a digital currency? Might this be one for you, Anka? Do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, and obviously in the process of the digitalization, this is most likely or very likely a conversion that is happening. It's actually happening already. So what consumers actually expect from the loyalty cards and the services that they get from their shopping experience at the moment with the plastic cards is also something that obviously they will expect in the future from whatever kind of app, super app, platform kind of services that they use. And in that respect, I could very much imagine that the digitalization there will also kick in, and all kinds of loyalty rewards, as are partially already happening today, will become more and more something of a, let's say, call it virtual kind of experience.
Perfect, thank you. In the interest of time, I won't be able to ask any more questions. I have a few ones here, but we'll save them for later. Just as a wrap, I think what we've covered is like a lot of the removing the friction in payments through different initiatives that's going on, and better regulation for all participants, and yeah, what we're all about, that level playing field, but that you can move within the region. And also innovation in payments and corporate partnership and structures, and what we're seeing will come maybe both around the digital banking space, but also the paytechs that we've seen coming up and who they're going to partner with going forwards. So thank you very much to our panelists today. And as per usual, we're donating money to UNICEF for your participation to help children everywhere. And also a huge thank you to everybody who came onto the call today. We'll share some information afterwards, and please follow us on LinkedIn, because you can see all the events and all the activities we have going on there. And we will write notes, and we will set up this call also in 2021 in the beginning, as Malcolm said, and we'll see how right we were or not. So huge thank you, and good afternoon and good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks, Camilla.